Having come up in the digital world, I'd say that my fascination for motion picture film was nominal at best. I don't think I really had an interest in it. I didn't really understand why it was still popular. I didn't understand really much of it at all. I didn't go to film school. I didn't really grow up, marveling over movies. I love movies, I enjoyed it, but I wasn't one of those kids that was a film buff growing up. So shooting digitally only made sense because that's the way I came up. That's the way that I was raised in this industry, and I just had no need to even want to learn how to shoot film. Fast forward, now that I've actually shot my first 2 rolls of 16mm film, I can easily say that I have a new obsession, I'd say. It is unreal. It's literally so much fun to use. It's such a challenge. It presented me with a new perspective, a new way of looking at cinematography, a new way of shooting, a new way of just composing images, or just like the intention behind a shot. It really just changed everything about the way that I perceive cinematography. I'm sure that a lot of you can relate, but have you ever wanted to kind of learn something new, but you never actually get a chance or never take the initiative to go and learn that thing? That was me with film for probably about a year. I started getting an interest in film about a year and a half ago, when a lot of the people that I was looking up to and a lot of the references that I was seeing were shot on film. And a lot of the time when we're shooting digitally, what are we trying to do? Emulate film. You see all the time, there's new LUTs that emulate film emulsions, whatever, there's so much stuff out there that is trying to emulate film. And I'm like, why not just like shoot on film? Obviously costs and, technical reasons, but I asked myself, why do I not know how to shoot film? I feel like as a DP, I need to have a better understanding of all the different mediums eventually to be a well-rounded DP. The other reason I wanted to try was to get a better understanding of what the post-processing was like, because digitally, you just upload your card and it's right on your computer, but with film, it takes a little bit of time to get back, and once you ship it off, you really don't know how it's going to look when it comes back. So there's a bit of anticipation, there's a bit of nervousness that, did you even shoot it correctly? Did you expose it well? So that waiting period was something that I really wanted to kind of experience and see what that was like. And it definitely took a little longer than I had hoped, but unfortunately, it's just the nature of the beast. So I decided to rent the Bolex Super 16 SBM camera body with a set of Zeiss Tevedon lenses, which included the 10, 25, 35, 50, and 75. Along with the camera, I purchased a set of Kodak 250D and Kodak 500T. I wanted to get a feeling of both stocks just to understand what both of them look like and how to essentially light based on the rating of the ISO. And the last thing that I wanted to get to complete my film escapade was a Sekonic L858DU Speedmaster light meter. And that was what I was most afraid of, but we'll get back to that later. So before I dive into how I started shooting, I just want to break down the overall costs of what this practice and what this test cost me. Full transparency, this is what I paid for this entire practice, and I tried to do it as intelligently as possible by renting the camera and lenses on a Friday. Meant that I get the camera and lenses on Friday, Saturday, Sunday, and I return it on Monday for 1 day rental. So for those of you that are balling on a budget and you have 1 day worth of rental, do it on a Friday, so you get to keep everything for the entire weekend. That's usually how rental houses work. All right, so cost. The camera body was $150 a day. The lenses were $125 a day. Light meter, $35 a day. A 100-foot roll of 250D and a 100-foot roll of 500D was $69.95 each. And to develop, scan at 4K, 4444, 2 rolls of 16mm film plus an upload to a digital server cost $272 for a whopping total of $716. Yes, $700 for a test. Was it worth it? 100% it was. And the reason? Because I freaking loved it, and I made some mistakes and I learned from it, but at the end of the day, money is money. It's important, but so is film. So I do it again. So whenever I'm starting a new project, whether it's a passion project, a test, a short film, narrative project, documentary, commercial, music video, first thing I usually start with are references. For this specific test, I went to FrameSet to find some commercials and music videos that resonated with me and maybe sparked a little inspiration of how I could create some vignettes over the next few days and this weekend, so I wasn't going in blindly. FrameSet is pretty easy when it comes to finding what you want, especially if you have a clear idea in your mind. It's super easy to sort images based on color. If you have a palette in mind, if you want to shoot something outdoors, you could use the green palette. If you want to shoot something inside with a specific color of shirt, or if you want to use a specific tone of lighting, you could pick a color based on that mood. Another great feature of FrameSet is the prompt section. Essentially, all you have to do is describe what you want to see in an image, whether it's color, action, one person, two person. If you want a woman sitting in a chair by the beach, just write it down and boom comes a ton of images that are closely related to the prompt that you are describing. That gave me a great plethora of images to be able to use for references and inspiration for my project. And for those not already signed up for FrameSet, click the link in my description to learn more. So I got the camera, I got the film, I got the lenses, I got the light meter. I have an idea of what I want to shoot, but what's next? The dreadful loading your first roll of film, and I give myself a rating of 6 out of 10. It definitely took me longer than I anticipated. I wasn't very good at it, and no, I'm not going to explain how to do it because I'm not very good at it. So there are a ton of videos on YouTube of how to load 16mm, especially in a Bolex, way better than I could describe. But it's humbling. It requires a lot of patience, but this entire process of shooting film was requiring a whole new level of patience and acceptance, and allowing myself to mess up on some things that otherwise I would have, not have with digital. But as part of doing these tests was just experiencing everything with the positives and negatives. Regardless of what happened, this wasn't a job. This was just me playing around, testing, seeing how I liked shooting on film, and if I failed at something, great. Learn from it. If I did something great, freaking awesome. But can't be mad at myself for messing things up or, taking too long to load on film. It's all a learning process. So shooting on film means that I need to nail my exposure every time, which is not easy when you have never done that before and you've only been going based on your monitor. And by nailing exposure, that meant I have to use a light meter, and I had to understand how to read light. I needed to understand the stops. I needed to be more intentional with how I was shooting. This was probably what I was most nervous about, and I've watched tons of videos on YouTube, and for some reason, understanding a light meter and exposure and how to get proper exposure on a film camera just seemed, for some reason, it just didn't connect with me at all. I don't know why, until like the day of the first test, I called my friend. I'm like, am I just not understanding? Like, how does this work? Why am I not grasping this? And, after talking with him and just kind of like fiddling around a little bit, I finally understood that in reality, yes, there are NDs that you could put into your camera, but you are really basing your exposure on your aperture, and how you want the image to look is based on that specific tool. Aperture. For a lot of the scenes which were outdoors, I was really reliant on the sun and the surroundings. Using the incident meter, I was able to get a read of the key side and shadow side of the subject to be able to get an accurate contrast ratio, or at least get an understanding of where I should start setting my aperture to. The first scene, huge mistake. Not really, but kind of. I forgot to put an ND filter inside my camera, and the ND filters in this camera are extremely adorable. They are these little rectangles that you put inside right before the lens, and they work great. But I forgot to do it. So reading during this first scene, it was like, you have to measure at an f/18 or f/22 or f/11. I'm like, I don't think I've ever shot that before in my life. I'm like, this can't be right. But then I remembered I don't have ND. And I'm like, oh, this does make sense, because normally at this time of day, if I'm shooting on a Venice or something similar, I'm ND'd pretty hard to be able to shoot wide open. So that was a huge learning curve, was metering at the beach during sunset. Well, the sun was still up, it was kind of bright, and everything was measuring so deep. I had to measure it at f/11, f/18, f/12. And I'm like, oh man, am I doing this right? Am I doing this wrong? But luckily, after getting the footage back, I realized that I exposed everything pretty much spot on. And there were certain moments where I had to kind of second guess, or I essentially had to double check myself as I was second guessing with a digital camera, and without ND, setting the ISO to 250 and the frames per second at 24, shutter speed at 1/48th or 1/50th, and cranking the aperture to f11 or f12 or f whatever to see if my exposure was right in the film camera, and it was, so that made me feel a little bit more confident in how I was reading and how I was metering. Shooting at a deeper stop can provide a really cool visual or a really cool look, but also know that you do need more light to do that. For some additional scenes where I was a little bit further from the subject, I wanted to get a more general reading, so I used the spot meter to get a reading of a few different parts of the scene. By doing that, I was able to get a reading and a few numbers and sort of base my exposure on what I wanted to be on the focus point in terms of general, even level. So for this wide shot, I was metering for them, but also for the sky, and I wanted to keep the detail and the color in the sky, but not keep it 100% in silhouette. So I set the aperture somewhere in between both readings to get a sort of balanced image. And this is where I started to get a little insecure, maybe a lack of confidence in reading, because the sky was reading at something really deep, like a f20 something, but the two people were reading at like an f8 or something along those lines. So I'm like, how far do I balance? Like, what is 2-stop difference overexposed versus 2 stops underexposed? So I overexposed to be able to bring down in post. But that was an example of me just like, I don't think this is going to turn out good. I'm definitely a little nervous about how this one's going to turn out, but luckily it worked just great. All right, so let's talk about some mistakes, because I definitely made some mistakes and I don't want you to make them. But you're probably going to, and you probably should make the mistakes, honestly, because you'll learn from them. But if you're shooting with a Bolex, you're shooting with 16 for the first time, be prepared to make a few mistakes, and it's totally okay. Don't beat yourself up unless, maybe you ruined every second of the roll of film and you didn't get anything. Maybe then you could be like, damn, I suck. But even then, don't do that. It'll be all right. Just try again. Do it again. So on this specific Bolex, and I'm sure a lot of the other ones as well, there's a lever that keeps the light 100% coming in. If you bring it down a little bit, it allows half the light to come into the camera, and then if you close it, no light comes into the camera. And you know what that means? If you are shooting and it is all the way down, you are shooting nothing. It is going to be black. And this is a feature of the camera that I still don't understand, but I'm sure somebody in the comments will explain it to me better. But it just seems so stupid. I know it's not, but it's the reason why I messed up a lot. That was just one example of a learning lesson or a learning curve that threw me for a loop, and definitely ruined, I'd say, about 30 feet of film in totality between the 250D and 500. So that in and of itself is a substantial amount of footage that you don't want to lose. So the thing about film that I find really interesting and quite a challenge is that once you put a specific film stock in, you are bound to that film stock. You are bound to a specific color temperature and ISO. 250D or 500 tungsten. 250D is 250 ISO, and D, as in daylight, 5600 Kelvin. 500T, 500 ISO, T tungsten, 3200 Kelvin. So once you put that in the camera, you are bound to that white balance and ISO, and you have to adjust everything else according to that film stock. So when planning this weekend to be able to shoot all these different scenes, I had to plan each scene according to what film stock was in the camera. I started with 250D, so a lot of the scenes that I was shooting in the first part of the weekend required me to be outside or in natural daylight. And then once I switched to tungsten, I did some scenes that required more lighting, some stuff inside that I wanted to do, and if there were anything outside that I wanted to shoot, I introduced an orange filter. And the reason for doing that was partially experimental, but also understanding that at 3200 in daylight, the natural light is going to be a lot bluer. So by introducing an orange filter, that would warm up the image, kind of making it more neutral. But with that being said, you don't have access to ND, but the orange does act as a sort of ND where it does take, I believe, about a stop of light because you're introducing a filter in front of the camera and behind the lens. This again just speaks to the specific intentionality that you need to have when shooting film, and why it's really important to plan your shoot out prior to doing it, so you're not just randomly picking a film stock for whatever happens to whatever project or whatever scene that you're doing, be intentional with it and know what you're shooting prior, so you are picking the proper film stock, picking the proper exposure and white balance. Whatever scene I was shooting, I was kind of rehearsing prior because I didn't want to waste film, so it was for myself to understand what I was going to be shooting, if I was moving at all, or just making sure the composition was good, and where the actor, my friends, essentially knew what they were doing. When I said action, they would start from A to B and knew exactly where to land and what they needed to do, so we both weren't wasting film. So one of my favorite scenes to shoot was the shower scene, and disclaimer, this was my wife. She was clothed, so for those of you that are watching this, like, oh my god, relax, take it easy. I ensured that while shooting this, because I knew this was going to go public, that she was clothed. I wanted to maintain respectability and make it appropriate, but I did feel that this was a scene that I wanted to shoot, and it was something in my head, and it's probably one of my favorites because this was one of the first scenes that I had to light and shoot on film that was more specific to lighting rather than natural light. Granted, I definitely think I grossly underexposed this image. Lighting the scene, I used a pavo tube overhead the shower with a honeycomb so it was more direct, and outside I also used a pavo tube outside of the window as a top light to kind of give a similar color temperature. And no, I don't remember exactly what hue this was, but it was a very specific orange that I liked, and it was just based on going through the different hues and finding one that I just resonated with in the moment. The one outside was just the bare tube, the one inside had the honeycomb, so it was more directional. But I think both images provide a really great representation of what film could do in low light and still look good, and honestly just provide a great representation of color. So this was my first experience shooting on 16mm film. This was a test, and it pretty much got me hooked enough that I have now shot a short film on 16mm film based on these tests and being confident enough that I could do it on a larger scale project. Granted, it's not a huge project, but with director that I've been really comfortable with and working with for a long time, we both agreed that we wanted to experiment and try something new and challenge ourselves. So stay tuned for that short film. Huge behind the scenes coming out with that one. But yeah, I'm officially hooked. I want to shoot more film, and hopefully one day I'll be confident enough to be able to pitch it on a legitimate project and maybe learn how to use some more higher end 16mm cameras. But for now, I'll stick to a Bolex and really try to get to know that thing a little bit better. So hopefully you enjoyed today's video. That's all I got for you today. I'll see you next time. Peace out.